Okay, so welcome to this basic bird identification course. This is a bird identification course that's aimed at people starting out birding, starting out bird identification. But I'm sure no matter what your experience is, you might learn one or two things from this course. Yeah, so what to expect from this course? Firstly, even though I am going to be referring to a lot of South African species of birds, this can be used to identify birds anywhere in the world. You don't have to necessarily be from South Africa to benefit from this. And if you use these techniques, you'll be able to identify birds from anywhere in the world. Basically, what we're going to go through is the basics that are needed to identify a bird. So everything from basically a step-to-step process to identify the bird that you're looking at. I advise having a notebook and a pen with you so that you can take notes, even though this video is on YouTube, so you'll be able to re-watch it over and over again. But it is helpful to have some notes so that when you're out there in the field looking at birds, you already have all your pointers down with you. Okay, so who am I? I'm this guy that's going to teach you about birds. So that's me, the crazy guy running in the bush. My name's Alfie Curling. I'm a birding and wildlife specialist, and I've been teaching people how to identify birds for over a decade, primarily in the tourism industry and out on safaris. I've been identifying birds for as long as I can remember. Yeah, I think I started saying bird names as some of my first words. So my obsession with birding is endless. So to start off with, it's not necessary to have any equipment when you're starting off, but there are some things that I would highly recommend that you have. Starting off with binoculars, they're really, really helpful because you can get a nice, good, close view of the bird and you can look for the various identification features. If you look in the description at the bottom of this video, you'll see a link to a video that tells you all about choosing the right binoculars for you, and I'm sure that will be quite handy. Another thing that is quite an essential one when it comes to identifying birds is a field guide or even nowadays with technology an app, because you need something to reference to work out that bird's identification. Another very helpful thing to have is a camera. It doesn't have to be one of these massive SLR cameras. You don't necessarily have to take professional photographs. The camera in the picture over there is a bridge camera, which is great because they're quite small and compact, and they still have quite a good zoom on them, and you can get some really nice details of the birds, and then you can refer back to those pictures and sit and go through them and point out the various identification factors from the comfort of your own home after your birding trip. And then another one that I wanted to include here is a spotting scope. It's not really necessary for a beginner. If you're living in a place along the coast where you're looking at birds way in the distance, or you live in a wetland or somewhere where there's a lot of waders that tend to be quite far away. So like if you're based up in the UK, it's quite a helpful tool to have. But certainly something you can look at getting a little bit later on once you've been birding for a while. But it is a helpful thing to have. All right, so what I'd like to do after each section is just give you a little bit of homework, just so that you can practice these things and get yourself prepared for the best chances of success and getting the most out of this course. So I recommend having a look and seeing what your best local field guides or apps are for your area. Normally there's quite a wide variety, but if you go onto any of the local birding Facebook pages and ask around there, normally you'll get some helpful advice. And then also start having a look at some binoculars if you don't have any binoculars yet, and have a look at the price range that suits you, and see if you can find ones that will work for you. All right, so what process do we go through to identify birds? I'm going to be going through this in a little bit more detail further on in the course, so don't stress too much about this just yet. And while I'm at it, there's going to be a link at the bottom of this video to a more advanced course where I break these things down into a lot more detail. But at the moment, I'm just going to go through the basics and touch on them briefly. So basically the process, I'm going to go through this quite quickly so we can break them down. Firstly would be the size of the bird, and then you want to look at the bill shape and color, which is quite an important one. The length and color of the bird's legs, plumage color or markings on the bird, what habitat it's in, what it's doing, what its activity is, and where it occurs, what's its distribution. So going into size, I like to break down the initial size comparison to 3 different sizes, so small, medium, and large. To start off with small, a good reference is something like a sparrow, which are normally around about 15 centimeters or about 5-6 inches in length, bearing in mind that we're talking about from the top of the head to the tip of the tail. And yeah, it's once you can work out the body size, normally you can work out what family it is. And it is a helpful identification feature. So those are the smaller ones. Medium-sized birds, things like a dove, they're normally up to about 30 centimeters, 33 centimeters, about 12 inches in length. And then there'll be large birds. So those would be things like a spurfowl or a pheasant, guinea fowl, a big eagle, the larger birds, an ostrich. And that's normally starts off at around about 50 centimeters or about 20 inches. In length. So just to give you a little bit more homework, so have a look at your local field guide or app and try and identify and list 2 birds for each size category, just so that you can start to get a bit of understanding of the sizes of birds and how they're grouped. Right, so going into bill shape and color, this is quite an important aspect of identifying a bird, because a lot of the times in field guides you'll find birds that are grouped by their family type, and you tend to find that families feed on very similar foods, and depending on what a bird feeds on, a lot of the times depends on what their bill shape is or their bill size is. So we're going to go into these in quite a lot more detail than the other factors in terms of identifying a bird, because I do feel that it's quite an important aspect to look at. Right, so starting off with the conical shaped bills, it's predominantly birds that are seed eaters. So if you have a look at this violet-eared waxbill, you'll see that it's got a very short conical shaped beak. Its beak's red in color, quite characteristic of birds that feed on grass seeds. Other birds like this brown-throated weaver will also have a conical shaped beak, but you can see the beak is a little bit longer, and that's because they also use their bills to weave quite intricate nests. So decurved probe-shaped beaks, these are various probers, so things like sunbirds or hummingbirds, various birds that feed on nectar. Tend to have these decurved beaks. You can see very long beaks that are pointing downwards slightly. Another bird that'll have something like that, interestingly enough, not used for probing, are things like bee eaters, which actually use their beaks to catch insects, and it's quite an interesting bill shape for catching insects. And then you'll get various waders that will be probing mud flats, trying to find various little mollusks and snails and that's in the mud, other invertebrates, and they tend to have these decurved probing shaped beaks. So straight probe shaped beaks, a lot of the times that's the waders. You can see in this example here, it's a slightly upturned beak of this green shank, but it's still quite straight. And once you manage to identify, okay, this is a straight probe shaped beaked bird, You can have a look and see if it's slightly upturned or downturned or just straight. Also take into consideration the length of the beak. Cask shaped, that's quite characteristic of hornbills. So in a lot of parts of the world you don't really have to worry about this, but if you're in Africa or Asia, you get hornbills with all sorts of different shapes and sized bills, with a varying sized cask on top of the horn, on top of the bill, excuse me. Yeah, so going through tweezer shaped beaks, this is probably the most commonly seen bill shape. It's predominantly birds that feed on insects, but also some birds that feed on fruit. So quite a thin, slender beak in various shapes and sizes, and predominantly birds that are gleaning insects from branches, or under leaves, or catching insects mid-flight, and then also birds feeding on small fruits and soft fruits. So short, stout, hook-shaped beaks. So they tend to be birds that are catching slightly bigger insects or even smaller creatures like mice. They have a much heavier bill with a very characteristic hook on the tip. As you can see there, they all have that tiny little hook on the tip of their beak. Right, chisel-shaped. That's also quite a standard shape for woodpeckers. You can see it's a straight beak, but it's got a much more bulkier, it's got a lot more bulk to it, as opposed to the probers, which tend to have a slightly thinner beak. So the woodpeckers tend to fall under this group. Spear-shaped, a lot of the times this is birds that tend to dwell in aquatic habitats, so in reed beds or close to water, and they're using that spear-shaped beak to catch things like fish, frogs, and insects. So things like herons, kingfishers, and egrets would be the ones with the nice spear-shaped beaks. Large angular shaped beaks, so that's very characteristic of flamingos. They tend to have quite a unique shaped beak in order to feed on the very specific little organisms that they feed on. Right, hook shaped. A lot of the times that would be the raptors, because they're using that nice big hook to tear off meat from the prey that they've caught. And then another bird family group that falls under this would be the parrots. They've also got these nice hook-shaped beaks, predominantly used for cracking open nuts and getting into fruit. So a little bit of homework for you in terms of the bill shapes is to maybe go through those bill shapes again and try and find 2 local birds for each bill shape. It might be a bit tricky for angular because that's just flamingos, and then also for cask shaped if you don't have any hornbills in the area that you live in. That's going to be 2 that you'll be able to get away with skipping. But then also use your local field guide. Maybe there's those birds occur not necessarily where you are, but close by. So go through that, and you'll also be able to see in your field guide how those various family groups are connected and grouped within the field guide. So the length and color of legs. So this is quite important to take note of, because you'll have birds with long legs like this heron, and they're busy walking through long grass or wading, busy catching insects or fish, frogs. And then you'll get birds that don't necessarily do that much walking and are mainly perching, so they'll have much shorter legs. And also very important to take note of the color, especially if you take a look at this black crake. You'll see those pinkish red legs, very characteristic and a great identification feature. Another thing to have a look at is whether the legs are feathered or not, especially when it comes to identifying raptors, which can all be quite similar. Having a look at whether the legs are feathered or not can be quite a handy identification feature. Right, so that's a great example in the picture down below of a raptor with feathered legs. Right, so a little bit of homework is to just list and identify 1 local bird that has legs that are long, short, and feathered. and also just to get a bit more of a feel of your field guide and what various characteristics the birds have. But yeah, use your local field guide or app for that. It's probably going to be the easiest way to do that. And then another thing to take note of, another very important thing to take note of, is plumage, color, and markings. So if you have a look at this African pied wagtail on the left here, it's great because it shows you a lot of really cool characteristics. And in the more advanced course, which you'll see a link to it in the description below, I'll go through this in a lot more detail and point out the various important anatomy features of a bird that you should be looking out on. But if you look at this wagtail and you look above its eye, it's got that very characteristic white eye stripe, so that's something you want to take note of. You want to take note of the black on its cheek, that nice big black breastband that goes across its chest. You can see it's got a white underbelly. Another thing to look at is wing bars. If there's any markings on the wings, so you can see it's got a white wing bar there. The color on the back, the color on the top of the head. If there's any distinctive markings on the tails. All of these things you want to take note of, because sometimes you'll have birds that are very similar, but there's a slight color difference or slight difference in those markings. And then you also get incredibly beautiful birds, and it certainly helps you to find them a lot easier because they've got those nice bright markings. And take note of the color and where the color is, because once again, sometimes you'll have colorful birds that are very similar, but the color is just in a different place. When it comes to the little brown birds, or the LBJs, or little brown jobs that I like to say, then having a look at markings is very important. So looking at eye stripes and wing bars and that kind of markings. So a little bit of homework for you to do in that aspect. So try to identify and list the birds with the most colorful plumage in your area. So this is quite a fun one. Have a look at your field guide, and find one bird, or can be more. You can do as many birds as you like, and with really colorful plumage. And that's a great way to go, okay, well, that's got a bright red breast, or it's got a white eye stripe. And try and familiarize yourself with the bird anatomy. A lot of the times in field guides that'll be in the front, they'll do a nice breakdown of the anatomy. Also, if you'd like a slightly more detailed information about the bird anatomy by me, then have a look in the description below, and you'll see the link to the slightly more advanced version of this course. Right, so habitat is another interesting thing to note, because a lot of birds will be very habitat specific. Some birds you'll get all over the place, and other birds will be very much habitat specific. So if you have a look on the left there, that's a forest in Mozambique, and a lot of birds that you'll only get in those forests. And then also take note that I'm using forest for example, but it can work like this with any habitat. That you get different types of that habitat. So you get lowland forest, highland forest, riverine forest, and certain birds will have that sort of sub-habitat within a habitat. So just take note of the habitat that you've seen the bird in, because a lot of the times when you're reading the descriptions in your field guides, they'll describe what habitat that bird likes to occur in. So a couple of examples of habitats here. You've got to have a huge array of habitats around the world. So I'm just going to cover three here quickly. Another one is nice big open grassy fields or open plains. Take note of the length of the grass. Is it long grass? Is it short grass? Are there trees? Is it more wooded? Is it more open? All things to sort of factor in when it comes to identifying a bird. Because once again, you'll have birds that are very similar, but one will like long grass, one will like short grass. So just take note of that when you have spotted a bird. And then another one that's quite a diverse one is the aquatic habitats, so water. So whether it's on the ocean or in a marsh or on a lake, on a river, depending on where that bird has been seen, can actually help you identify that bird. Right, so a little bit of homework for you. If you were to have a look in your immediate area, try and identify a few different habitat types. So have a look at what various habitats you have in your local area. And like I said, there's a bit of a breakdown of habitats in some field guides. So have a look there first, and then you can match up what habitat types you have in your area, and that'll actually help you to work out what birds occur in that area, and you can start looking for those particular species. So, activity, what the bird is doing. So, a lot of the time, some birds will give off very characteristic behaviors. Um, so, I want to give an example of a South African bird, something like a familiar chat. When it lands, it flicks its wings. And that's a very handy identification feature of it. So, various birds can sometimes do things that are very unique to them. So, take note of what that bird is doing. Also, have a look and see where they are. Are they busy moving around in the undergrowth of a bush? Are they quite shy and skulking? Or are they perched on top of a branch and hawking insects or displaying? Or are they calling from the top of a branch? Or are they calling from deep inside a bush? Are they walking on a road on the verge of a river or moving between reeds? Are they out in the open? Are they walking? Are they flying? Um, Try and take note of what those birds are doing, because that's really going to help you when it comes to understanding their behavior. Once again, when you're reading up about the description of the bird in your field guide, sometimes that can be quite a key factor. Right, so a little bit of homework. This is a fun one for you. Is to go outside and observe the various birds in your garden or wherever you are, and have a look at the activities that they're doing. So take note of how the one bird is behaving differently to another, and try and see what unique features each bird has. And how this is going to help you in the future is that eventually, if you practice this enough, you can sometimes just see what a bird is doing and pretty much identify them just from that, because they have their own characteristic behaviors that they do and activities. Right, so the last one is quite important, distribution. So if you're having a look at a book and you found this bird and you think, oh, it could be this, but it doesn't occur where you are, it's quite unlikely that it's going to be that bird. So best to start having a look to see if there's any similar species that occur in that area. Now, I'm not going to lie, birds have wings and they fly, and for the various twitchers out there, the guys that go and chase interesting and rare birds or unusual sightings, there are birds that will pop up in the middle of nowhere that don't make any sense as to why they're there. But 99% of the time, birds tend to stick to their natural distribution. So if you've got a good field guide, it will have a distribution map of that bird, and you can work out whether it occurs in your area or not. So very important thing to really sort out between similar birds and get your list a little bit smaller. So a bit of homework for you again. Start getting an understanding of what birds occur in your area. Have a look at your field guides, look at the distribution maps, and try and make a list of the birds that occur in your area. And it gives you a good start. And you can start looking at those birds and then working out what habitat types they're in, and then going to those habitat types, and then you know how they behave. So you're going to be looking in the undergrowth for them, and you find a bird in the undergrowth, and then you know what the markings are that you want to look for. So you have a look at the markings. The markings match. Fantastic. You have a look at the bill shape, and everything all matched together, and it all falls in place, and all of a sudden you're identifying birds. So it's quite a nice way to work out what's in your area. And also, if you're going birding in a different area, have a look and see what occurs there, and it gives you a list of species that you can potentially look for. Well, big thank you for having a look at this course. I hope it's been helpful. A huge thank you to Lynette Rudman. She provided me with all my photos for this course, and yeah, a big thank you to you guys. my closing advice is to practice these techniques. The more you practice them, the better you become. Practice, practice, practice. And yeah, the more you practice, certainly the better you'll become. Uh, if you've really enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to my channel. I've got a whole bunch of other wildlife videos that I'm sure you'll enjoy watching. And if you have a look in the description below, you'll see a link to the more detailed version of the course where I go into things in a lot more detail. And you'll see the links to where to find that. And if you're interested, please go ahead and do that one. And yeah, good luck with your birding, and I hope that this helps you to identify birds. I hope it's been broken down a little bit better. Feel free to comment down below if you have any questions, if you need any more information. And yes, thanks for watching.